walk 25 miles in the snow, uphill, both ways, to go to school to only learn how to read and write the letter A. Back in ye oldie-timey days, people had to sew their own clothes because everyone was poor and clothes were expensive, and somehow they were still able to make their dinner, take care of their jobs, feed their families, educate their children, take care of their animals, work their farm, all in the matter of 24 hours.
As God is my witness, I'll never be hungry again.
Pre-1950, there were actually 72 hours in a single day. This is the only way it was possible for women and men to do everything that they are accused of doing in the past, because apparently they worked a lot faster than we do today.
Could you imagine living on the farm, no running water, no electricity, 20,000 children, 15,000 pets, couple of cows, a horse or 5, at least one husband, and somehow you are expected to not only feed your entire family, run your household, work the farm, weave, hold on, I missed a step. Grow your own cotton, shear your own sheep, process your own linen, have a silk farm, process that fabric, weave that fabric from home, and then somehow manage to sew the clothes for everyone in your entire family, including yourself, while also feeding your family, cleaning your home, taking care of your pets, taking care of your farm, educating your children if they weren't in school and they didn't have apprenticeships yet, keeping a fire going, surviving, just in general. There's literally no way you could do it unless you had like a billion hours in a day. Like, it's just not possible. And somehow you're like so jacked up on like ketones or something.
What is wrong with you?
Chip, I'm all jacked up on Mountain Dew.
Go, go, go all the time. Sewing everything. It ain't possible, guys. So let's just do some myth busting today. How did people actually get their clothes in the past? Let's talk about it.
The gown is gorgeous.
Thank you. I saw it in the window and I just couldn't resist it.
First things first, I'm gonna set some ground rules for this little deep dive, if you will. I am going to be focusing my discussion points here on the 18th century and very early 19th century, pre-sewing machine. Because once we have the development of the sewing machine, that's when things really start to change when it comes to the clothing industry and how the clothing industry works. And it is still affecting our clothing industry today. So we are talking pre-sewing machine, and we're also talking once Mantua-makers as a trade developed in the early 18th, late 17th century. For those of you who are not from the United States, in the United States, we have a very romanticized idea of the 18th century because, you know, that was like when we like threw our big hissy fit and won.
I will lay down my life if it sets us free. Eventually you'll see my ascendancy, and I am not throwing away my shot.
I'm probably gonna make some people mad saying that, but whatever. I used to work at Colonial Williamsburg. I could say what I want. And with that, there's a lot of mythology and tall tales, if you will, about this concept of how people functioned in their homes, how people functioned in the past. And we like to think that people in the past, they were super do it themselves, can do, make do. And a part of that is because in our recent history here in the Western world, we think about our grandparents or our great-grandparents' generation, we think about the 1940s, the 1930s, the 1950s and 60s. That point in time in the history of the Western world, there was a lot of make do, can do. You fix it, you make it yourself, you sew it yourself, you make your own clothes, you make your children's clothes. Because that is such an intrinsic part of our recent history, as well as how we as a society evolved, it's understandable that we assume the same thing happened in the 18th century, in the 19th century, in the 17th century. But the reality of the situation is that the 18th century was actually a lot more like us than we are like the 1950s. if that makes sense. Political, socio stuff aside, I'm just talking about consumer behavior. Speaking of Georgian lives and what they do, this week's video is sponsored by Acorn TV. That's right, if you have not heard of Acorn TV yet and you are a fan of all things British TV, Acorn TV basically brings all of Britain's television at home to you wherever you are. You can stream Acorn TV from your laptop, your iPad, your phone, from Apple TV, from your Amazon TV stick, from Roku, from Comcast, it doesn't matter, they got it everywhere. Two of my personal favorites, A Stitch in Time with Amber Bouchard and my girl Nina Michaela from Tudor Tailors, At Home with the Georgians, based off of Amanda Vickery's research and book where she explores the inner workings of 18th century Georgian life. If you are a fan of good British quirky TV comedy, then I highly recommend checking out The Other One. It is a must-watch show that follows two sisters from very different worlds who have no idea that the other one exists until their father actually keels over dead. For only $5.99 a month, you can have thousands of hours of binge-worthy TV brought directly to your screen. So escape to Britain and beyond without leaving the comfort of your home. Try Acorn TV free for 30 days by going to acorn.tv and using the promo code AbbyCox. Commercial sewing patterns were not invented until the mid-19th century. For that, there are tutorials, there are books coming out that help walk people through how to make usually fairly basic garments. For example, one of my favorite books is A Workwoman's Guide from 1838, and that is a primary source walking through how to make a bunch of garments for your home, for women, for children, for men. But it doesn't go into tailoring, it doesn't go into extensive dressmaking. It has some tips and tricks for dressmaking, but it doesn't go into the really complicated fitted garments. It sticks to very basic things, very geometric shapes. So we are seeing those books and those tutorials come out in the first half of the 19th century, but it really starts to explode in the last half of the 19th century, which is also great fun for us because if you want to know how to draft an 1870s bodice, well, there's like 15 manuals on archive.org that are more than happy to walk you through it right now. But before that, how you made your clothes was very protected because in the 18th century and most of the 19th century and even today we have trades, and these trades are apprenticeship program operations, and this is the educational program as well as your professional program. The information is passed down from the master or journey person down to the apprentice, and you have a graduated system moving up within the program itself. Pre-sewing manuals, pre-tutorials, sewing patterns and sewing machines. Information on how to make clothing was passed basically orally. It's not a printed tutorial textbook situation. It is extremely difficult to find manuals discussing how to make men's suits, how to make women's clothes before the mid-19th century.
You chose poorly.
And the reason for this is since it was a trade, they didn't want to share that information because that puts their trade at risk. So we need to kind of take that into our brain space when we start viewing the past and starting to understand why this was this way. For us, we have information readily available everywhere. We have YouTube, we have the internet.
Not just museums, you can go anywhere on the net and access resources from around the corner or to the most remote regions of the world.
However, with that free and readily available information, there is some risk to harming trades. And so in the 18th and early 19th century, protecting that information was basically protecting your business. It was protecting your income, because if you shared that information, then anyone could do it, right? Anyone. I use that term loosely. Clothing, pre-18th century, 18th century, and most of the 19th century and up through the 20th century was custom made. That means that you would go to your tailor or your dressmaker and they would make something custom for you. Ready-made clothing was not readily available for purchase up until basically the end of the 19th century. If you are a sewer and you're watching this, I'm sure that we've all been there. When you try to set your own sleeves on yourself, you think, why do I do this? This is the worst thing in the world. This is a terrible idea. Now, could you imagine doing that for everyone and yourself in addition to everything else that you have to do all the time? It just doesn't make sense. Where a trained professional can do it like that. It's their job. Now, who made the clothing? There's a lot of factors within the clothing industry because just like today, fashion is a huge part of the economy. It was a huge part of the economy in the past. But for the sake of this conversation, we're going to be talking about three main trades: tailors, Mantua-makers, also known as dressmakers, and milliners.
Your grandpa style. I'm gonna take your grandpa style. No, for real. Ask your grandpa, can I have his hand?
Tailors are a male-dominated trade, just like they are today. And what tailors did is they would take measure, create patterns or shapes to create tailored men's clothing. So your suits, your coats, your waistcoats, your breeches. For women, they would also do riding habits, and day making was also related to the tailoring trade, and they are male-dominated trades. When you say a tailor, you're actually referring to someone who is male. A tailoress would be the female gendered version of that word, or a lady tailor. Merchant tailors were extremely common, so you might go to your tailor and he might be a merchant tailor, so he might show you what new wools and silks are available. Sometimes with men's waistcoats in the 18th century with the beautiful embroidery, they were actually pre-embroidered in large panels, and so you'd have the fronts and the pockets and all that pre-embroidered professionally in France, imported over, and then you could just kind of pick out which design you liked best, and then they would cut that out and fit it to you. So sometimes when you see men's original waistcoats, you'll see alterations done to like shorten it or lengthen it, and just little changes to kind of make it work, where from a distance it looks fine, but when you get up close you can tell that it had been altered. If this is a new tailor that you've never gone to before, they will take your measures using a large piece of paper called tape, and they make cuts and notches into that paper to denote measures and widths and things like that. So they would take your measure, and from there they would create the pattern on the fabric. So long as they had your measure tape and your body shapes didn't change, like it would be super easy to create a new pattern for you on the fabric. Like they don't even have to keep paper patterns of you. They just have your measurements on file. The length of time that it goes into making those garments, it just depends on what the garment is. But we're looking for a three-piece suit, you know, a lot of work because it's three separate garments and a lot of care goes into making them. Men's fashion changed as well. You could very easily update waistcoats, coats, to fit with the latest fashions. Breeches don't change as rapidly. It's more about like what fabric's trendy and like color combinations, but your waistcoats and coats could be updated to be kept into the latest fashions. Mantua-making, or dressmaking, which is eventually what it was called in the 19th century, is a female-dominated trade. Mantua-makers would take fabric, lay it to the female's body, cut and fit fabric to mold it and shape it to her to create the fashionable garment. Mantua-makers basically do is what we call draping today. And so this is how we have that separation of the two ways to create clothing. We have flat patterning, which is related to the tailoring trade, and then we have the draping, which is related to the dressmaking trade. Now, you might be going, well, why did Mantua-makers drape to the body or cut to the body instead of flat patterning like tailors did? And the reason for that is because of the bone support garments, where tailors would add padding and wadding and shaping to the interior of the men's garments to create structure, to help create that beautiful proportion, that beautiful line. Since women wore stays or corsets and hoops and bums and pads and things like that, their silhouette was perfected and fashionable through their understructures. So as a mantua maker, what you could do is easily just lay the fabric around the woman's body, cut and fit the fabric to her, and she was already perfect in her stays or in her corsetry. So it just kind of evolved that way. There's a lot of history in the mantua making trade and the history of the mantua making trade, which I don't want to get into today. That is its own video in and of itself, and I will eventually do that video. It's just not the point of the video today. Now, what the heck are milliners? You all might think of milliners as hat makers because that's what milliners are known as today. Pre-mid-19th century, milliners are the makers of all the accessories, all the accoutrements. So we're talking caps, hats, mitts, muffs, gloves, cloaks, pelisses, petticoats, aprons, neck tuckers, elbow ruffles, stocks and cravats for men, knee buckles, shoe buckles, stock buckles, shoes, cheese. I'm not even kidding, maybe we just sell cheese.
Special value, well.
Jewelry, toys, games, tobacco. It was a lot. What milliners would make are those white accessories, your bits, your pieces. They would also sell fashionable items. So milliners sold fashion, not fitted clothing garments. Milliners and Mantua-makers were females usually, though men definitely got into the millinery trade because there was an opportunity for a lot of money to be made. You could do an apprenticeship for both because both were apprentice trades, or you could do one or the other. You could then actually have an opportunity to make more money because in millinery, since you're selling ready-made items and imported goods from London and other countries, you have that wholesale retail markup that we have today. Labor's very cheap, but fabric materials and items like that cost more. So as a business person, having that millinery aspect to your trade meant that you had the ability to make a lot more money than exchanging money for services. Let's say you're a middling sort female and you need to have some clothing made. The way this would work is that you would go to, well, I'm saying you because this is just easier because I can get into like, well, if you're like out in the country and then your husband and he has to go in and he orders it for you, write letters, shit comes from London, it doesn't come from London, you're smuggling stuff in from France because that colonial life. But anyways, for the sake of clarity, if you were someone who needed new clothes, what you would usually do is you would go to potentially a merchant or warehouse that sold fabric, and you would purchase the fabric for your new gown. The amount of fabric you would purchase would depend on what kind of style you had in mind, and if you wanted a matching petticoat, if you wanted like matching trim, etc. And those kinds of decisions also just depend on what's fashionable for that particular moment. This is going to be your biggest expense.
Dollar bills, y'all.
Labor in the 18th century and the 19th century it is not where your money goes. In the 18th century and 19th century, it is your materials. Fabrics came in various widths, and so the yardage that you would purchase depends on how wide the fabric is and also what kind of gown you're going to make. There's no real way to transcribe like 18th century money into modern money. I know some people are like, oh, you just do like this, and it's like, no. It doesn't really work that way. This is how I always like to explain it, is that if we know that a journey woman, Mantua-maker, made like 2 to 3 shillings a day in income, think about where you are in social hierarchy and like economic level, social class. And a Mantua-maker would be usually like middle class. Not too high, not too low, middle. And wage disparity is no different. Just being female, just a little bit lower on the side. That's kind of where you're at. So if you're a middling sort of person, very solidly middle class, think about how much you make a day, and there you go. So the fabric could cost anywhere from a day's wage to a year's wage. It just depends on how much you have to spend. Once you've purchased your fabric and you're having it made into a gown, you need to go see your Mantua-maker. For the sake of ease and clarity, I'm gonna focus this little story on a local situation. You have your Mantua-maker that you like to work with, you take that fabric to her shop, you set up that appointment, and you go in for your fitting. And you tell her what style of gown that you want, you talk to her about what's fashionable, and from there, she cuts out the linings to fit you. Or maybe she has some of your shapes already on file, and so she kind of already has a pattern, if you will, available that is cut to you in those stays. And then from there, they're going to fit that to you and build the gown over top of that lining. This process, depending on how elaborate the gown is, can take anywhere from 8 to 12 hours worth of work to 60, 80, 120 hours. So a very simple, plain gown with no trim, no embellishments can be made in as little as 10 to 12 hours, which is basically a work day in the 18th century, where the more elaborate gowns, we're talking several days worth of work. You would need to go in for about 3 fittings or so. You have the initial cut fitting, you have the fitting that does the side seams and the waist to fit the bodice, and then basically the final fitting is going to be your sleeves, as well as any kind of finesse finishing. She makes up the entire garment for you. You as the customer, all you have to do is just go and get fit. That's it. And then pay your bills on time, because if you don't pay your bills on time, they're gonna get super salty about that, okay? We can't have bad credit even in the 18th century, because if you have bad credit in the 18th century, you're screwed. you're just screwed. You gotta have the good credit, guys.
Too bad I didn't know my credit was whack, cause now I'm driving off the lot in a used subcompact F-R-E-E, that spells free, creditreport.com, baby.
Now, what happens after you have your gown made and it's no longer fashionable? Good question. It's actually super easy. Again, your main expense is your fabric. And so long as that fabric is fashionable or can be made fashionable, what you're going to do is you're going to take it back to your Mantua-maker, or maybe you're fed up with that Mantua-maker and you have a new one that you like and you're loyal to. It's fine, it's no big deal. And they will remake it into the latest style. So that might be changing the trim. It might be changing where the waist hits. Maybe
matching trim and a matching petticoat on the gown is just like no longer the thing. And so like we really need to update this because, girl, you are not okay right now, okay? This is like super like 1769 and 1771, like, come on, let's get with the program.
And so then they would just pick everything apart and remake it to fit the style for that particular moment. And so when you look at diaries and manuals, Barbara Johnson is a fantastic example of this. Her book was published several years ago, but now basically the entire book is available online, that she notes when she's had gowns remade. And she will have gowns remade time and time and time and time again. It is extremely rare today to find an original 18th century gown that has not been remade from something else. So they would just refashion their gowns to keep up with the latest trends. And so that's how people in the past were able to keep up to date with fashion. That's why fashion was able to move as quickly as it did, because not only were people in the 18th century just super into trends and fashion anyways, like they loved fast fashion, literally. They were like, ooh, fast fashion, give me some of that H&M goodness, oh yeah. But they were able to keep up with it much more easily than we are today because they remade their clothing into the latest fashions. Now you're probably sitting here asking yourself, okay, but Abby, why couldn't someone just figure out how to do it themselves and then bring it home? As we've established, tailoring and Mantua-making are two separate trades. Even if you were someone who was skilled and was able to kind of pick up a bit on, say, like Mantua-making, when are you, as a housewife, farmer's wife, a woman, ever going to really be in a situation where you're going to be watching tailors work making the clothing of the men in your family? There's no real reason for you to be a part of it, unless you were actually working in a tailor shop as a seamstress working on the clothing. There are definitely tailors and Mantua-makers who dealt with certain clientele levels, but honestly, for the most part, these places, these shops were actually very democratic in their clientele, and it was very equitable in their clientele. So you could be in a shop that has a very wealthy person to a very poor person. So long as they're able to pay their bills, no one actually really cared. Like, a tailor's a tailor. Now, the exception to this rule is that if you were of the gentry class, because there was no aristocracy in the United States, the wealthy class of the colonies, what they liked to do is actually have their clothing made in London by London tailors and London Mantua-makers, and then have it shipped over to them. You know, it's a status thing. It's saying, look how wealthy I am. I can have this made in London and shipped to me. Even if the garment doesn't really fit you, which was a common problem, it was a status thing. And so then you'd have it go, and your local Virginian tailor would have to fix it for you because it didn't fit. Anyways, I'm digressing here. So having your clothes made in a different country was a status thing. And this also carried over into like the United Kingdom and Great Britain and France. Oh, Leonard, you're the best. All right, guys, so that was some fun myth busting. I hope that you all enjoyed this little educational ranty McRant rant. And now I'm like thinking about all the things I can talk about when it comes to like milliners and Mantua-makers, and like, so good. Oh, it's so good. I love good millinery Mantua-making gossip. But with that, everyone, I hope that you all have a lovely rest of your week, and I will see you all back here next week with another video. Bye. Hold on. I need an outfit change. Haha, perfect. With the Georgians, it's one of, oh. I'm just gonna say it. I have a crush on Amanda Vickery. I think she's, and For you Downton Abbey fans out there, the other one features a hilarious performance from the beloved Siobhan. Oh, I said it right. Siobhan Finneran. They make me say that name. That's really unfair. If documentaries are not your bag or your cup of tea, let's get back to history. Maybe one day I'll end up on Acorn TV. Amanda Vickery, if you're watching this, I love you. I think you're great. I did your daughter's hair once. Not to be super creepy.